Hello friend, before you get started on this video, I would like you to subscribe and leave a like on the video. This is actually going to encourage me to create more content and publish. Thank you so much, and let's get started. Hello guys, and welcome to the channel. Today we are going to talk about HTTP request, and we're going to look at AJAX and Fetch API. Okay, so let's get started. So HTTP request, essentially, by way of introduction, we all know that the internet has a vast array of data or resources that are hosted on different servers. Okay, now for a person to access any of these resources or data, the browser needs to be able to send a request to the server and then display that resources to the user. Now, the message that is sent by a browser or a client to the server is what is known as a HTTP request. And essentially, HTTP actually stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it's simply an underlying format that is used to structure that request, right? And essentially, it fosters effective communication between a client, which is the browser, and a server. Now, when these requests are being sent to the server, right, the client can use various methods, and that's basically what we're going to look at in this crash course. So basically, the first I'll talk about is AJAX. So AJAX is a more traditional way to make an asynchronous HTTP request. When I say asynchronous, basically it's just a word that describes the way operations or tasks are run. So basically, the way most people think about, like, how tasks run in JavaScript is that let's say if there are 10 lines of JavaScript, the general idea is that line 1 has to run before line 2. Okay, so if you have a script that has maybe different functions or different block of codes, right, the idea is that the script on top has to run before the next one, or the task has to run before the next one. Now, asynchronous request simply means that multiple requests can run at the same time. In other words, request B does not have to wait for request A to be completed before it begins to be processed. That's basically what it means. Now, it's important for you to know that there are many things that we can do with the data, right, that is stored. So we can data can be sent using HTTP post method, but we can also use HTTP get method to retrieve data from a server. And then well, there are other things we can actually do. We can delete data, we can update data, but we're not going to go into some of those things in this crash course. A more recent method for performing HTTP request is the Fetch API, and we're going to look at the two in this tutorial. Now, AJAX actually stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. It's important to know that AJAX is not a programming language, and it actually uses a combination of a browser's built-in XML HTTP request objects, okay, and JavaScript HTML DOM to display some kind of data on the page. Okay, now AJAX application can actually use they use XML, but they can actually use text and JSON to transport data. So the whole meaning of the name AJAX, that's asynchronous JavaScript and XML, is actually misleading, because it can also work with text and JSON, and many times you're going to work with JSON to transport data. Okay, now basically, if I want to summarize AJAX, I would say that AJAX can update the content of your web page without having to reload the page. Okay, and basically it can read data from a server. Okay, it can update a web page without reloading the page. It can send data to a web server in the background. So it's a very interesting concept. Now, but there is a more recent, and I would say a powerful web API that lets you make asynchronous request, and that's the Fetch API, and we're going to see both in this crash course. In other words, we're going to compare both, and it will help us understand better each of them. Now, Fetch API allows us to perform HTTP request to a server, and then for each request it creates what is known as a promise, which must be resolved, okay, in order to define the content type and access some kind of data from the server. And then it's supported by most browsers. Don't worry if you don't understand what I just said. We're going to see it practically and it will become very clear. All right, so basically we're going to go into the practical aspects of the project. So this is basically just a simple index.html, and basically I have ajax.js. So let me just open one more. So this is fetch.js. So I have index.html, and on my index.html basically I have a styles.css file that I linked, and I've written some small piece of code here. So let me right click and open with live server. Yeah, so basically this is what I have. And if you let me just scroll down. Okay, so basically I have a div with a class of container that is holding another div with a class of user, and essentially I have a button, right? And this h2 which says users, and then I have an empty div with an ID of users. So basically this empty div, right, with an ID of users is where I'm going to display content. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly write something in my CSS file. Just give me 1 second. I actually don't intend to write any CSS in this project, so let me just say 90. Okay, yeah, so that's better. All right, so basically that's what I have. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it users.json. Okay, and basically in this users.json I'm just going to create an array of objects. Okay, so how are we going to do that? I'm just going to do like so, and I'll do like so, and then inside of this I'm going to start by creating an ID, and I'll then say for this one I'll say 1. Okay, then I'll give a comma, and then I'll create another one, and I'll say name, what's going on today, and for this first one I'm just going to say John Doe. Okay, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this twice. Okay, and I'll change this one to 18, and then here I'll say age. Okay, so this last one is going to say email, and here I'm just going to say john@gmail.com, and that's it. Basically the last one doesn't need a comma. Okay, so this is basically how we write JSON. What I'm going to do is I'll just copy this, and I'll just copy it. I'll add a comma here. I'll go down and paste it in, and I'll just do maybe like 3 seems fine. Okay, so let's come here. I'll do 2, and I'll change the name just a little bit, so there should be space here. So I'll just say Mary Doe, which is supposed to be like his wife, but apparently his wife is older. And then I'll say mary.gmail.com, and then I'll make this ID 3, and then I'm just going to here, I'll just say okay, and I'm just going to make this 38, and let's just make this. All right, so we are done with our JSON file, right? And I think we can actually just close. Well, I can just leave it open so we see what we're doing. Now what we're going to do is first we're going to use the AJAX method to fetch the data from this JSON, to get the data actually from this JSON file. So I'll open my ajax.js, ajax.js, so that's fine. Let me show you something in my index.html. So I have a script tag, and it's currently calling the ajax.js. Okay, I've commented out the fetch.js. All right, so let's go to ajax.js and let's begin. So what do we want to do? Basically we want it such that when we click on this button, we're going to get the users from the users.json file, and we're going to display it on the page without reloading the page. Okay. All right, so we're going to make some kind of request and get these users from the user.json file. All right, so let's just get started. What do we have? Let me target. So we're going to target the button right here. Okay, so let's begin. So let me just say const btn, which is button, or before then I'll add a comment. I'll just say load all users. All users. All right, so let's do const btn, and let's set it to be equals to documents.getElements by id, because we use an id there, and we're just going to say the btn. Okay, I'll just close this up here. I'll then say btn.add event listener, and basically we want to add a click event that is going to call a function of get users. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to create the function. So create function get users. Okay, so I'm going to say function, and the function is get users. Yeah. Okay, and this function is going to take an e, and basically the first thing we want to do, because this button has a default behavior, okay, when you click on it, it's going to reload the page. So basically what I want to do is I want to say e dot prevent default. Okay, all right, so when you click on that button, we don't want the page to reload. Okay, all right, so next so before then there are 4 things that we need to be mindful of when we are making working with AJAX. Okay, when we're making an HTTP request with AJAX. So the first is to actually instantiate the XML HTTP request object. Okay, so I'll say const HTTP is equals to, and then I'll say XML HTTP request. Okay, so because it's an object, I will say new XML HTTP request, and I've instantiated that object. Okay, so the next thing, so that's the first, right? The next thing is to call the open method. So I'll say http dot open, which is this http here is actually referencing this variable we created here. Okay, so dot open, and then inside here I'm going to specify some things. Okay, okay, maybe I'll just do that, right? So what we want is we want to get something from a file or a server. Okay, in this case a JSON file, and then next I will specify the file I want to get some data from. In this case it's users.json, and then I'll add another comma, and then I'll specify whether I want it to be asynchronous or not. In this case I want it to be asynchronous. Okay, all right, so that's the second one. Now the next thing is I want to call the unload method. So I'll say http dot unload. Okay, and it's actually going to be equals to a function, right? Okay, so I'm just going to leave that now, and then the last thing is that we're going to send whatever data we generate such that it can be displayed on the page. And the way we do that is we say http dot send, and then yeah, so essentially we're done. Okay, but if you go ahead and click on this now, nothing actually happens yet. Okay, so now what we want is inside of this unload is where we are going to then specify what exactly is going to happen. Okay, so I'll come inside of this unload, and I would say that if so I want to check for something, right? And I'll say that if the status, right, of this HTTP request is successful, or is successful really, so basically the way you say that is you say this dot status. Okay, and if it's equal to 200, okay, in other words it's successful. basically you can have 403, okay, that's for forbidden. You can have 404, that's for maybe not found or something like that. Okay, so basically we're saying that if this status is 200, if it's successful, now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to console.log. So I'm going to log to the console, right? And I'll get the response, or I'll get the response text. So basically the way we get the response is that we say this dot response text. Okay, so let me save this. All right, so basically before I click on this button and right click, I'll do inspect so that I have my console, right? And then I'll click on get users. Okay, so now let's come to the console. You see here that we're already getting the content of the users.json right in our console just by clicking the button. Okay, basically this is what we just did here, console.log this.response text. We've made progress now, but what we want to achieve is that we want to be able to display we want to be able to update this page with this data. Okay, and then we don't even want to have to reload the page. Okay, so now let's see how we're going to do that. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to, so let me just come here and well, I can just comment this out. I can also leave it anyway. So I'm going to create a variable. I'll say const users, and I'll set it to be equal to json.parse. Okay, that's because for us to be able to, display this data on the document, on the page, we have to first parse it, right? Because when you essentially when you save data in a JSON file, it's saved as a string. Okay, but when you want to access that data, you then have to parse. Okay, that's the whole concept of json.parse and json.stringify. So but we're going to parse that data, and I'm just going to grab this.response text here, which I can easily just type, and then I'll just paste it here. Okay, so this.response text is now in this variable called users, right? Okay, so now let's continue. Now we want to display this information here on the page, and basically we want to display it in this div that has an empty div, actually, that has an ID of users, right? Very good. Now I'll come back to my ajax.js, and the first thing I'll do is I'll create an empty variable. So I'll say let output be equal to, and then I'll just say an empty string. Okay, now what do I want to do? I want to loop through the users, right? And that's essentially why I converted it into an object using json.parse. So I'm going to loop through it, and I'll say users dot for each. I'm sure you know this stuff already. And then we're going to say function, and we're going to instantiate this user. And then what do we want to happen? So basically we want to take this output here. So I'll say output, and I'm going to append. So I'll say plus equals, and we're going to use template literals. Okay, all right, so basically what we want to do is we're going to create an HTML markup which we want to display on the page. Okay, so we're generating markup inside of our JavaScript. Basically the first thing I want is I want a horizontal rule to separate each of the users, right? And then I want an unordered list. So ul, inside of the unordered list, I'll then create list items that will take the ID, name, age, and email. Okay, so first I would say li, and then I'll say ID. So it's template literal, so you can do literally whatever you want. So I'll just do this, and then and then inside of this I'll basically just say user, that should be small letter. So user, which is referring to this user here, and then dots, and then I'll come here and get the key. So in this case it's going to be ID. Okay, so basically I'll just duplicate this 4 times, and I'll change this to, so the second key is name, and here I'll say user.name, and I'll just do same for this one. So this one is age, this one is email. So I'll just come here and I'll say email, and I'll say age. Okay, so I'll save that. So basically we are almost done. Now we've been able to create the markup inside of our JavaScript, right? And this for loop is going to loop through the users.json and get the data from it. Okay, now what we want to do is we want to be able to put this inside of our HTML page, and remember that we have a div with an ID of users. So I'll come here, right? I'll come outside of my loop and I'll say document. So I'll first target the div, so get element by ID. And what am I looking for? I'm looking for the ID of users, and I'll get the inner HTML, and I'll set it to be equals to this output which I've created here. So I'll just say output, and then I'll close. Now let's save. What do you think will happen if I click on the get users? So let's see for ourselves. Boom. So let me just close this up. So I clicked on the get users, and as you can see, all of the users are displayed on the page. Okay, so user 1, user 2, user 3, and then that's all. Now we've been able to see how we can get data using AJAX. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to replicate the exact same thing using Fetch API. And remember that this is just a local user.json file on our system. Okay, so what that means is that after we've been able to see how the AJAX and Fetch API actually works, we're going to then see how we can use it on an external URL like a service, okay, an API, a REST API online. Okay, that's what we're going to see next. But first, I'm going to come here and I'm going to open fetch.js. Okay, now I'll go to my index.html and I'll comment out the ajax.js and uncomment the fetch.js and save. So you see there, if we click here, nothing happens. That's because the ajax.js is no more connected. Okay, good. Now basically for the fetch, I'll come to my fetch.js and I'm going to need the variable here, so I'll just copy it so I don't have to repeat myself. I'll paste that in. Okay, and then I'm still going to create the get users function. So I'll just come down and say function get users, and it's still going to get the e. So let's do e dot prevent default. Okay, so let's come down. Now how does the fetch API actually work? So let me just show you the syntax first. So I'm going to say fetch. Okay, and then when we use the fetch API, it returns a promise, right? And basically the way you then get a response is that you then say .then, right? But instead of putting all of this on one line, I'm going to bring it to the next line, right? And I'll say .then, and then we're going to call a function, and this function is supposed to return a response, so a response from that server. Okay, so that's the first thing. We use the fetch. When we use the fetch API, right, we are supposed to get a response from a server, right? So that's the first thing. When we get a response from the server, right, we are expecting some kind of data, because this is actually a get request. We want to get something from the data. So I'll say .then, and I'll add another function here. And what do I want? I want to get some data. I'll come out here. Sorry. I'll come out here, and basically this is the syntax. Okay. Now, let's come back to the response. So assuming we've it actually starts from fetch. Okay, so we are in the fetch, this first line here that says fetch. What do we want to fetch? Where do we want to fetch data from? We want to get data from user.json. That's the first thing, right? So we're done with that. Now in this response area, what do we want to do? We want to return response.json. So I'll say response.json. Okay, very good. Now after we've gotten the response, we want to be able to access the data, right? So I'll come here and I'm going to say console.log and I'll log in the data. So I'll say console.log, and here I'm just going to, let me just say data first and save. Okay, so what happens when I click here? So let me just refresh and open my my console. Oh, my console. Okay, and then let me click on get users. Okay, so there is some kind of error. Let me just look at this. Okay, oh, I see. So here we say user.json, so it's actually users plural.json. So let me save that and let's click on this one more time. Okay, so here you see that we have this object here, and basically it has the ID name. So basically key value pairs are displayed here. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and comment this out and save, and then I can close this for now. All right, so now what do we want to do, right? We have been able to access the data and we've seen it in our console.log. So I think the rest should actually be straightforward. So I can simply just go to my AJAX and actually get it out. So for creating a variable, looping through, and even getting, so I'll just copy this and come here, and then I'll give a space here, and oh, I think I copied what I shouldn't have copied. All right, so I actually did. So I'll start from let output and I'll copy up to this point. I'll copy that and I'll go to fetch and I'll paste that in. Okay, yeah, so this is fine. And then let's just go back and let's go back and let's grab this last piece here that calls the DOM, and then I'll come outside of the, it's looking like I'm having some kind of error here. Let me just see what exactly the problem is. So here, okay, so I think I didn't copy something out. So let me just come down here and let me close it. So I need this and this. Sorry. Okay, yeah, so that was what I was missing out, this guy here. Okay, so basically I'll just come out of this guy and paste in the document.getElement by ID user and blah blah blah, and I'll save. And I think this is going to work exactly the same as the AJAX. Okay, so let me just first click on this. So let's see. So let me save that, and I hope I did not make any typographical error anywhere. So let me just go to my console and find out. Okay, so I'll click on get users and let's see. Users.forEach is not a function. Oh, wow, I just copied and I did not even update what I was copying. Okay, so basically we're not referencing users.forEach right anymore, because inside of this our second then statement here, we are referencing data. Okay, so it's the data we're actually accessing. And remember, when we did console.log, we logged in the data, right? So I'm going to then change these users to data. So this is going to be data.forEach. So it's going to loop through the data that it has gotten from this user.json. So if I save that, we shouldn't get any more error. So I'll click on get users, and as you can see, it has displayed the users from the JSON file. Okay, now what we are going to do next is, so this is basically just working with a local JSON file. Now what we are going to do next is we're going to work with a REST API online. Okay, so let me just get the link. It's going to be an API that has quotes. Okay, so let me just paste that in here so we can start work. Okay, so this is basically an array of quotes, right? And it's on an external URL. What we're going to do is we're going to use the both methods we've learned so far, and we're going to get the quotes and even manipulate it. And so basically that's going to be the project we build to further drive in the concept we've learned so far on VS Code. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so basically what we have here is we have an index HTML file, and we have this markup that we've added. So let me right click and open with live server so we can see what we're doing. Okay, so basically we have quote generator. We have an input field that says with a label of number of quotes, and then we have this button to get quotes. Okay, so basically it's a very simple markup, and then the expectation is that when we click on get quotes, we would get like the quotes from this API here. Okay, so let's get started. So basically let me just take note of my classes and ID. So for my button, I'm doing class of get quotes, and for where I will display my quotes, it's a class of quotes. Okay, so okay, then for number, we have an ID of number. Okay, so basically that's all we need. So I'll start with AJAX. Okay, so we can then upgrade to fetch API. So first let's create a variable. So I'll say const btn, which is button, and then I'll do documents. So it's query selector this time. So query selector, because it's a class, and basically it's a class of get quotes. Okay, so let's do btn dot add event listener, and we want to add a click event that is going to call a get quotes function. So QU. Okay, so we're going to come down here and we're going to say function, and it's going to be get quotes. Don't forget to add our e parameter here, and the very first thing we're going to do, let's do e dot prevent default. To prevent the form from reloading. All right, so remember our AJAX, what we do in the AJAX, right? We said we're going to do 4 things. The first is to instantiate the Xmlhttprequest request object. So I'm going to say const http. Okay, and I'm going to set it to be equal to new, and I think once I start typing XML, I should get the. All right, so we're going to instantiate that, so that's done. All right, the second thing is that we're going to select what we want to open, right? So I'll say http, that should be just 2t dot open, that's the open method. And then what do we want? What kind of request do we want? We want a get request because we want to get some data from that API. And then we're going to specify the URL. So basically I'll just grab this URL here, I'll copy that and I will paste that in. All right, and then lastly, so let me add a comma here, we're then going to say whether we want it to be asynchronous or not, and in this case we want it to be. Okay, so that's the second thing. The third is we are going to call the http.unload method. Okay, so for the unload method, remember we're going to make it equal to a function. All right, and then last but not the least, we're going to call the http.send. And we're almost done, really. So this is like the 4 steps to writing your AJAX, right? But what do we want to do inside of our unload method? So it's very similar to what we did before. We want to check if the status is equal to 200. So I'll say if, and then I'll say this.status is equal to 200. What do I want to do? Let me console.log. So I'll do console.log, and I'll say this.response text. Okay, sorry, that should be response text. Okay, all right, so everything looks good. Let's go back to our quotes generator and let's click this. Oh, I should show my console before clicking this. So I would inspect. By the way, I know the shortcut for that, but I'm just used to. Oh, so I'm already getting an error here. Add event listener of null. Oh, this is query selector. So this is a class. Okay, so it should be .get quotes. And that error should be gone. Okay, so if I click on get quotes, let's see what happens. So it takes a while, like a few seconds, maybe like a second, and then it gets the quotes and it displays it in the console.log. Okay, so it's quite much. I think it's maybe like 6,000 plus quotes. Okay, so this is very much. Okay, all right, but what do we want to do? What we want to achieve is we want to be able to display the quotes on the page, right? That's what we want to achieve. So I'm going to close this guy here, right? And I'm just going to do a regular for each loop to loop through the quotes. Okay, so let me come here and let me first comment this out. And remember, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first, let me just create the output variable. So output, and it's going to be an empty string, just like we did in the last video, in the last example. And then we're then going to loop through the, what's it called, the data. We're going to loop through the data, but I think what I should do right now is I'm going to just give me a minute. I'm going to put this response text in a variable, right? So I'll come down here and I'll say const response, and I'll set it to be equal to JSON. Well, it's actually going to be response text. So response text, okay, this.response text, sorry, apologies for that. But I'm going to then wrap it around this JSON.parse, okay? So I'm sure you remember this. So let me just do that, and yeah, okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm then going to loop through this response. So I'll say response dot for each, and by the way, I can actually use the arrow function here, but I'm just choosing to stick to ES5, okay? But you can actually modify this and use your ES6 arrow function, okay? All right. So what we just did is that we've looped through the response and we've instantiated it with this word here, quote, okay? So inside of this loop is where we are then going to, you know, update this output. So I would say output, and I'll say plus equals, let's do a set of backticks for template literals, and let's then add the markup. So basically what I want to do is I want to add list items, right? So let me go to the So basically we have text and author. So it's going to be like quote.text, quote.author. Okay. So, and I want to put it in a like list items. So I'm just going to say li. So li, and I'll close, and then I'll say quote, and then let's do, and let's say quote dot text. Okay, so that's the first one. Now I'll just duplicate this and say quote dot author, and this will then say, this will say author. Okay, so it's as simple as that. Then just under it, I'm going to add a horizontal rule, like a line, and then I'll save. Now we're almost done. There's just one thing we need to do. We need to get the element where we want to display the quote, and that's this one with a class of quotes, this another list. Okay, so I'll come back to my ajax.js, and I'll come out. Where's the loop? Okay, I'll come outside of the loop, and I'll say document. So it's going to be query selector because we want to just get a class, and the class is dot quotes dot inner html is equal to output. Okay, and I'll save. Okay, and then let's go ahead and click on get quotes. All right, so you see we have our quotes displayed on our page, right, using the AJAX method. But there is a lot that we can do. Actually, this is, I think, 6,000 plus quotes here. Okay, and it doesn't make sense that we cannot manipulate and say, okay, what if we want to get 5 quotes? What if we want to get the quote randomly? Now, many of these things actually should be done with from the API, right? From the owner of that API. But in this case, I don't think they've actually done those configurations on their API. So I'm going to show you how you can do that. So for example, if you wanted to get only 5 quotes, if you wanted to randomize the quotes, that's what I'm going to show you how to do. So first off, let's set it such that when we add a number here, we're going to get that number of quotes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to come here, right? So I think this is all of our statements. Okay, it ends here, so let me just give a space. So this is where the function ends, and this is, so let me drag this up, and let me just remove the excess spaces that I don't need, and everything starts here. Okay, so I'll just remove the space I don't need, just so that when I start editing it, editing it together. Okay, so now inside of this function, right, we're going to say e.prevent default. Then we're going to add an if else statement. So I'll say, oh, first let's create a variable to get the number, right? So I'll go to my index.html, and you see this input, it has an ID of number. Okay, so I'll just come down here, and I'll say const number, and I'll make it to be equal to document.getElementsById. And what am I looking for? I'm looking for the ID of number. Okay, that's all. Okay, so here I'll come inside of this one here, and I'll add an if else statement. I'll say if, sorry, that should be if, and let me just add my else here. Good. So basically I'll say that if the number dot value, okay, but it's not the number dot value we're interested in, is the length. Okay, and I'll say dot, dot length is equal to 0. Okay, what do I want to do? I want to return, and then I'll just going to do a simple alert. So this alert is just going to say, please enter a number. Okay, all right, else I'll then put all of this code inside the else statement. So I'll come here, and I'll grab from this first. up till this guy here. I'll copy it, I'll cut it rather. So let me just go up a little, and then I'll put it inside my else statement. Okay. All right, so let me save, and let's click on get code. So it should work the same. Okay, no, I'll leave the number of quotes empty first. So you see, please enter a number. I'll select that, and I'll just enter 4 and click on get quotes. So it's still going to get all the quotes, 6,000 plus quotes. That's because we've not created a function to get the number of quotes we specify here, right? And that's what we are going to do. So basically we've used a for loop, and all of this code we're writing, we're going to use it inside of the fetch API. So we're not going to have to repeat ourselves. So basically we use a for each loop here. Where is that for each loop? Okay, so response.forEach. Yeah, what we are going to do is we're going to use a for loop instead. Okay, so I'm just going to comment out this response.forEach. So sorry, let me just comment that out, and then I'm going to create a for loop. Okay, so let me just come down here and I'll create a for loop. So I'll say for, and let me just do this. So what do we want to do? The regular for loop. So let's just instantiate I. So I'll say let I is equals to 0, and I'll say I is less than response.length, and then I would increment I. So I'll say I plus plus. Okay, so that's basically it. I hope there's no response.length. Okay, so there's no typo there. Okay, now what do we want to do inside of this I? First of all, we're going to add an if. Okay, maybe before adding the if statement, I'll just grab this output here. So I think it starts here, so I'll just grab this guy here and I'll just paste it in. So Ctrl V, and I need to get rid of the comments. Okay, so that's fine. Now, but what I really want to do is I want to say that if, so let me add an if statement. So I'll say if, and then I will then say I is equal to number.length. What do I want to happen? Sorry, number.value, not number.length, number.value. So that's what you pasted into the number input field. What do I want to happen? I want to break out of the loop. Okay, so break. All right, so I hope it's clear here. So basically this is just basically what we need. So let me save this, and hopefully I don't have any typo. So I'm just going to come here, I'm going to say 3, and I'll click on get quotes. And I have an issue, I have some problems. Okay, so let me right click and inspect, and let me go to my console, and it says quote is not defined. Oh like I said, that's why I really sometimes copying and pasting is just a problem. So we should not actually have quotes because we are checking for response.length, right? So basically this should be response. Okay, this is response, and then we're checking the ith item of the response. So let me come down and copy this, and I'll just replace the quotes here. So Ctrl V, and everything should be fine. So I'll save that, and I'll come here, I'll paste in, I'll write 3 and click on, let me just close this up so we can see, and I'll click on get quotes, and as you can see, voila, we have 3 quotes. Okay, so genius is 1% inspiration and 90% perspiration. Okay, so let me just click on get 1 quote, and you see that it's also genius is 1% inspiration and 90% perspiration. So basically it's always going to start from the top and down. Okay, so it's not going to change if I say I want, let's say 10 quotes, and I click on get quotes. It's always going to start from genius is 1%. So what do we want to do is we want to find a way to randomize the quotes. Okay, like I said, this is something that should actually be available from the API creators, right? From the creator of the API. But I seriously don't think this API have done something to that effect. So, but I'm going to show you how to do that with regular JavaScript. Okay, so basically, let me come down here outside of my function, and I'm just going to create a function to shuffle the quotes. Okay, so let's come here and let's say function, and this function is going to be shuffle, and it's going to take in the quotes parameter. And I think this is a little bit tricky. This method is by Fisher Yates. I'm not sure the name now, but I can always check and let you know. Okay, so first let's say and I'll say CI, which actually in my mind stands for current index, right? So first I'll say quotes.length, and I'll add a comma there, and then I'll say temporary value. So I'll say temp value. I'll add a comma there, and then I'll say random index. So this can actually be just random index. Okay, and I'll close. Now, what do I want to do something while there are still elements in the array, right? So let me just add a comment here, and I'll say while element exists in the array. Okay, so what I'm basically going to do here is I'll say while and CI is greater than 0. Okay, so let's open that up. So I'm going to make this random index. I'll pick a random index. So basically I'll say random index is equal to, and of course you know our math.floor thing, so math.floor, and inside of that we're going to put in our math.random. So that's a method, and we're going to multiply by the current index, so that's CI. Okay, so I'm sure you most likely are familiar with this if you've actually generated a random number before. Okay, so now what we'll do next is, sorry, let me come back, and okay, the comment should actually be here. So what I'm going to do is I'll decrease the CI by 1. That's the current index. So decrease CI by 1. So basically we're just going to say CI and minus minus. Okay, so what do we want to do next? We want to swap the last element with it. Okay, that's with the CI. So let me add a comment here, and I'll say swap the last element with CI. Okay, so how are we going to do that? First off, we're going to say temporary value is equal to quotes, and we're going to get the CI. Then we're going to say quotes CI. So let me just, well, I can actually just type it. So let's say quotes and the CI. We're then going to set that to be equal to quotes and then random index. So quotes So you see that we are swapping things here. So I'll say random index, and then I'll then set the random index to be equal to the temporary value. So let's say quotes and let's say random index, and I'll set it to be equal to temp value. Okay, so this is a little bit tricky, but basically all we then need to do is to come out here and then return the quotes. All right, wow. All right, so we still have the fetch API method. So I would just want to actually show you how you can apply this function here. So let me just see. So first of all, we created this variable, let's ci, and we gave it these values, and then we said that while ci is greater than 0, we wanted to we said that the random index should be math.floor, and we use the ci variable here. We multiplied it by the ci variable, so we're going to get a random ci. That's the ci is actually current index, right? I didn't want to type it all out, so that's why I said ci. And then we reduce the current index by 1. Then we then swapped the last element with the current index. That's what we did here. This stunt we did here, temporary value quote ci. Then we said quote ci should be random index, and then quote random index temporary value. So we just mixed things up a little bit, and then we then return the quotes. So let me then apply this function. So basically the way we apply this function is that I'm just going to come up to where we talked about the JSON, so response here, and I'm going to wrap all of this inside of the shuffle, and I'll come here and voila, and let's save. Okay, so let's start by let's just get one. So I'll click on get quotes, and you see here that okay, maybe before I'll shuffle it, let me just do Ctrl Z and save, and let me get 1. So genius is 1%. Let me get 2 quotes. So it's always going to be genius is 1%, right? Now let's come back here and let's shuffle it. So we're going to wrap this around the shuffle. Oh, I made a mistake here, sorry. It should be like so, and let's save. Okay, so now let's do 1 and get quotes. So you see we're not getting genius is always. If I do that again, it changes. So it's basically shuffling through the quotes and giving me something different every time. Okay, so basically we've been able to see how we can specify a number of quotes. So let me say 3, and all of the quotes are shuffled, right? Now what do we want to do? We want to be able to apply everything we've learned using the fetch API, and that should be relatively straightforward. Okay, so I'll go to my index.html and I'll comment out the AJAX.js and uncomment out the fetch.js, and I'll save. Okay, so nothing works because we just commented this out. So let's go to fetch.js, but first let's get some variables that are constant. So these 3 variables are constant. In fact, I can even start from here and copy, and I'll just paste that in, and I'll just complete this here. Okay, and what do I want to do? Basically, I even need to get the e.prevent default, so no need to type it out when I can just paste it in. Okay, then I am also going to get the well, I actually want to be fast with this, so I'm just going to get this guy here. So let me copy that, and let me come to my fetch, and I'll paste that in. Okay, so else is when I'll now perform my fetch call. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, so like we did before, fetch, and we're going to fetch a URL, right? So where's the URL? Let me get the URL very quickly. So it's this one. So I'll copy that, I'll come here, I'll paste it in. So we can either choose to paste it in, or we can even put it in a variable. So I can come up here and say const URL, and I can then make it a string like so, and then paste the URL in and then close it. That's all. And instead of typing the URL here, I can simply just say URL. So it can even be maybe capital letter, so URL, and then I'll make this capital letter as well. Okay, so that's fine. All right, so let's come down and dot then, and here I'm going to use the let me just use what I showed you earlier. Okay, so function, and basically remember we're going to get a response, so we're just going to say response here, and essentially we're going to return that response. So return response.json. Okay, so I'll come down here and say dot then, and what do we want? Function, and we want to get some kind of data from the server, so data. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to console.log. So let's just make sure that we've not added a typographical error. So I'll say console.log, and I'll just do json.stringify to convert it into a string, and then I'll put in the data, so data. Okay, so let's save, and I guess I should not have actually make this if else statement. Okay, well, I can simply just add something there. All right, click and show the console, and then I'll click on get quotes. So let me come to the console. Unexpected token in JSON at position 0. Okay. You know what? Let me just paste in the quotes the URL here just to be sure that I'm not making. Oh, it's a variable. No wonder. So it's a variable. I shouldn't have wrapped it around quotes because that made it a string. So let me save that, and I think it should work now. So let me just click on get quotes. All right, yeah. So you see here that we have all our quotes and it's just displayed here. So I think we're on the right track. So I'll close this up and let's continue. So now let's what we want to achieve is we want to be able to display our quotes on the page, right? So like we did in the previous what's it called, in the previous lecture, or in the previous example, in the data example, I'm going to comment this out first, and I'm going to say data, right, is equal to, and then I'll add my shuffle. Well, maybe I shouldn't add that yet, so I'll come back to that. So I'll just say let output. I feel like I should just copy this thing, but anyway, let output is equals to, and then I'll set it to an empty string. Okay, and then I'm just going to go straight to the for each loop. Okay, in other words, I'm not going to go use the for loop. We've actually seen how the for loop works, sorry, how the for each loop works. So I'm just going to use the for loop. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just what do I want to do? I will just copy this guy here. That's the for loop, right? I'll come here and then I'll modify it. So let me paste that in. Now I'll say for let I is equals to 0, and then I'll say I is equals to data dot length. Okay, and then if number is equals to blah 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 response. So here I'm also going to say data, and here we're going to change this to data. Okay, yeah, so I think that does it. Okay, one last thing we need to do is we need to display it on the page. So I'll just grab this guy here, Control C, and I'm just going to come outside here after the for loop, and I'll paste that in, and I think that should do it. I'll save, hoping that I have not made any mistake, and I'll come here, just add a number and click on get quotes. Okay, great. So you see here that we've displayed so we're actually displaying 4 quotes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, it works out of the box. That's because we've already added the let me come up. We've already added the number variable here, and then we said that if I is equals to number dot value break. Okay, so now what we need to do next is we need to shuffle the quotes, right, like we did before. So I'll just come here and I'll grab my shuffle function, very nice function we have here, and I'll just come down and paste it in. Okay, so there's no need to actually retype it, it works the same way. But what I'll do is I'll then come up here, and after we've said function and then data, I'll come here and I'll say data is equal to shuffle, and then I'm going to pass in data inside of it. Okay, so essentially I'm just shuffling the data and still, you know, retaining the variable name. I'll save that, and let me comment it out first so we can actually see the difference. So here I'll say 1. Genius is 1% inspiration, right? So let me come here and save that one more time, and then I'll say 1, and let's see what happens. So you see, if no one had a blah blah blah. So basically it's a different quote for every time you click on get quotes. Okay, all right, so it's been a long crash course, 1 hour plus, but so far we've been able to see how we can make an HTTP request to both locally and externally to like maybe a REST API, and we've been able to see how we can get data from a server online. Okay, but like I'm going to say that that's not the only thing you can actually do with HTTP request. That's not the only thing you can do with AJAX and Fetch API. You can actually do so much more. You can actually post something to that server, you can delete, you can update and stuff like that. But I just wanted to cover this initial part, the basics, to show you how you can get data or some kind of resource from a server using both AJAX and Fetch API. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this content, I want to encourage you to hit the like button and to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much, and see you in another video.